Let me get that going. All right, welcome. Today I am hosting for this week's episode, Liane and Elle, and we are talking all about healing religious trauma. And Liane supports folks who have left high control religion to reclaim their freedom and pleasure by doing so, so that they can heal from the trauma. And I think a lot of people, unless they've been in like an actual cult, maybe don't understand the ways in which they've experienced religious trauma. So I'm super excited to have her here today. And she has lived this experience. So she grew up as a Jehovah's Witness and got married as a virginal bride. I like that word. I actually haven't seen that word in a long time. A virginal bride, and was the consummate good girl. So today, 5 years after it all fell apart, the marriage first, and then the rest kind of unraveled, she's been on her own journey of healing and has also certified as a pleasure-based trauma-informed coach. Awesome, me too. And she has become incredibly excited about helping others heal and reclaim their lives on their own terms, using sexuality as a portal to their power, wisdom, and sovereignty, which is why I wanted you on this call today. So welcome. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. And for those that haven't met you, as you're new to the group and as a guest speaker, I'd love for you to share maybe a little bit more on your journey, and we'll go from there.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so thank you for that introduction. Hearing it, I was like, oh, yeah, that is me. um, and yeah, I am South African by birth. I come from Cape Town, and I've been living in Vietnam for 3.5 years now. So that's where I am in the world, and that's my accent as well. And yeah, I'm trying to think about how to even keep it short and simple. But as you mentioned, I was born into a Jehovah's Witness family. I was third generation, and that was my whole life. I was such a true believer. I never saw any of the issues. And yeah, very, very good girl. Even though, as I described myself as virginal on my wedding night, I believe now that virginity is just a construct anyway. So I didn't want to say virgin. Um, but yeah, I was that girl, that very, very good Christian girl whose whole life revolved around that. And I put myself and my desires completely on the back burner and really repressed them. And yeah, then literally 5 years ago today,
All right.
on this actual day,
Okay,
which I realized
amazing.
last night when I was typing to you, I realized, oh my God, it's tomorrow. I Everything just went completely to shit, very unexpectedly, and it was in the aftermath of that. I was diagnosed with PTSD, and I sought out different healing modalities to help myself. And yeah, it was in that I found somatic trauma therapies. So using the body, that was really the thing that helped me. I'd been really stuck in this loop of trauma and talking about it to a therapist, but just not really getting past a certain point. Yeah, and then when I found somatic therapy, that really changed. And yeah, there's so much to the story, and we'll get into it, but ultimately here I am now. And one little tidbit that I'll throw in there is that I used to be a fashion buyer when I was Jehovah's Witness back in the day. And then when everything ended, I also changed my career, and I started working at a marketing agency for sex toys, actually, which was like an absolute just baptism by fire into everything sex and sex positive. Because up until that point, I didn't even own a sex toy. This was exactly after I just started transitioning out of the religion. And I think that really put me on my path. The combination of healing my own trauma and then being exposed to this incredible world of sex positivity. And yeah, here I am now.
That's amazing. And there's so many things that I want to dive into today. But first and foremost, so what was that like for you growing up in South Africa and Cape Town as a Western religion in a country that has so many vastly different spiritual, tribal, native, indigenous
Yeah.
cultures there? What was that like for you growing up in such a stark contrast to that?
Yeah, that's such a good question. As you said that, I just got goosebumps because it just made me realize how fucked up the the religion that I grew up in was, because one of the biggest things was this whole like white saviorism mentality that I grew up with, and obviously didn't realize at all at the time. And looking back, thinking about things like it wasn't necessarily mission work, but pretty similar, like going out on the weekends to underprivileged areas and just going to knock on people's doors and bring them, the Lord's word or whatever, and somehow feeling that I was doing them a favor. That's been something that I've really had to reflect on a lot in my journey out of that, and realizing how harmful and damaging and just plain downright disrespectful that was. And yeah, I would say realizing now in hindsight, like how that is such an integral part of these kinds of religions and how they have established themselves, and colonialism as well. Like they are so intertwined. And I guess I obviously am very regretful about my part in that. I very proudly claim that I never converted anyone, thank God. Thank God. But yeah, it's something that I'm very keenly aware of in myself now, because that tendency was, I would say, indoctrinated so young. So it's something I'm aware of now, and it's something that I also really like to speak about and point out when I see it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love how you just articulated this as well, because it
It
really talks about how
really
I'm having a little bit of feedback here. Let me see. I'm like hearing myself talk again. But the piece where religion started being a part of colonization, and how that really gets indoctrinated into societal beliefs, into governments. And I mean, we're really seeing this a lot in America as well over the last year, and how it still very much affects the psyche and the well-being and just the overall perceptions that we have. And a huge piece of that too, to what you spoke to, is the white saviorism piece, where whether it's the Peace Corps or missionaries that go to Africa, and they're, it's, oh, we're going to like save them, and it's like that's part of the problem. So I mean, this is a huge topic, and not necessarily like the one that we're really diving into today, but it is absolutely such a huge piece of it. So yeah, so I'm sure that there's a lot of intricacies there as well. And so fast forwarding to when you started becoming aware, was it more of like around your divorce and that process that really cracked you open and woke you up to it? Or when did you start to kind of feel like, I don't know if this is my thing? Like, I don't know if this is where I want to be with all of
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I would definitely say that's a very good way of explaining it, like that it was my divorce that cracked me open. And basically, my husband had a horrific affair that was very dramatic and yeah, just ridiculous actually. And that kind of started the process, and then a few other things that happened as well, and which ended up with me sort of separating from him, moving out on my own, and having a lot of emotional distress. Like at that point, I was barely coping. And then getting to a point where at the beginning, I was really hanging on and clinging on to my faith as the thing to get me through. And looking back now, I just realized like I was so innocent. And the first trauma, I really clung to my faith and went deeper into it. But then the second one, which was just a few weeks later, I really, it started causing a lot of anxiety for me. And I remember going to church one day and having to take like Xanax or whatever the equivalent is, and really being so stressed out just needing to go there, and realizing like this is not good for me. I can't handle this right now. And I just stopped. So I stopped going, and then there was a period of self-discovery. It also ended up with me actually going to the church and saying that I sort of requested, or I confessed, which I knew would end up with me being shunned. So Jehovah's Witnesses like officially shun people, and that includes not being able to speak to your immediate family. It's very, very abusive and controlling in that way, and manipulative.
Mm-hmm.
But at that point, it was like I needed a break. I needed a break. And so I thought like I would take 3 months off and just have some peace and quiet. But I still totally believed, and I thought I would go back. And then in that time, for a few months, I was still a believer, but just sort of on the outside and dealing with my shit, my trauma, losing my family, losing pretty much, like I lost every possible thing you could lose other than my life. And then after a few months of that, I one day just had a realization. I had never gone online and read about my own religion, because that was completely banned. You were not allowed to read from any other sources, which of course in hindsight I'm like, oh my god, like, but you're so scared that you don't even see that. You're just like, they're like, it's the devil will get you if you read anything about us, because he'll lie and manipulate you. So when I did that, it was crazy. Well, I don't like that word. It was incredible and surprising how in one night of going online and reading and digging, pretty much it all just fell apart like house of cards. Like it just came down. And the biggest thing for me was I really finally learned and understood about the sexual abuse that goes on within the church and how it's covered up. And as soon as I realized that, pretty much I stayed up all night, read about everything, and by the morning I just knew I could never go back. And that then became like, well, now what do I do? Because now I'm shunned from my family and I can't go back. And do I fake it for the rest of my life? Yeah. So to answer your question.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because there's such, and this is so common among religions all over the world, where there's always sexual abuse. And I
Oh,
really truly believe, because it's so Puritan in the ways of like sex is evil and sex is dirty and sex is wrong, and it's so repressed that
yeah.
those types of things start happening just almost naturally, due to like the toxicity of just repressing and being so rigid in our humanity in general. Not saying that any of it's okay, but I think it's just like an interesting paradox. Well, it's a fucked up paradox actually, but
Yeah.
of the sense of how cutting off our sexuality, especially for women and for men, can cause so much trauma for kids, for the people in the community. And so I kind of want to segue into that too, around, because we were talking a little bit before this about how I grew up going to church 3 days a week, and my grandmother was very much like, sex is wrong and dirty and all the things until you get married and then you have kids, and but then like nothing else, no other part. Yeah, no other part is talked about or anything. But I'm curious around what that experience was like for you, like going into the marriage as a virgin, virginal going into marriage, and then working right after, shortly soon after that, in a sex positive industry, like what that was like for you, and kind of like if it was all like very shocking and like holy shit, what is going on? Or like, I would love to hear more what that experience was like for you.
Yeah. So there was actually, I think I should just clarify, there was like me being the virginal bride, getting married, and then being married for 8 years, 7.5 years ish, and then leaving the marriage and sort of being in the midst of all that trauma, diving into this new job. So there was a bit of a gap. So in between, I was having sex with my husband. Um, very boring. And then, yeah, it was, so pretty much it was like all at the same time, like leaving my marriage, moving out. I'd gone straight from, my parents' house to my husband's house. And suddenly I was on my own living in an apartment in Cape Town for the first time. I'd lost my entire religious community because I was shunned. So I started hanging out more with my friends from work, from my old job as a buyer. And yeah, it was like, I sometimes think it was like a teenage, where in normal human progression, everybody goes through the teenage rebellious phase where you sort of find your own feet, discover who you are. But I never really had that. So at 28, I finally had that. And I was like a little deer just coming out into the world and running this boutique marketing agency. And I was the boss, but I had no idea like about anything. I could do the business, but like as for the sexual stuff, I was completely out of my depth. And I just met such incredible people. I met, from such diverse walks of life, and I got exposed to like the full spectrum of sexuality, like the LGBTQ community, just so much. And it was the most amazing experience. And I took to it like a fish to water, I think is the saying. And ultimately realized like that had always been a part of me, and in fact been a very fucking big part of me, but I had just kept it on lock for so many years. And then that was like, I could finally just be myself. Yeah, it was amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really at the heart and core of what I would love to talk about today is how much there's just so much sexual repression in religion and religious communities. And I get like the Puritan, like, whatever, but it ends up causing so much more harm that it does good, like teaching abstinence instead of actual sexual
Yeah.
education. And so
Yeah.
yeah, I would love to talk about a little bit about how sexuality is so conformed in religion and like your experience with that. And then also just kind of like the shaming or the damage it can do to women. Because there's so many, I know there's women in this group or like peers of mine that I've had conversations with around really understanding how damaging really orthodox views, religions, structures can be for sexuality in general, but for women's sexuality specifically.
Yeah. Yeah. This is my favorite topic. So let me just try to rein myself in. Yeah, I think as to what you were saying earlier about these sexual abuse scandals that always show up within these very repressed fundamental contexts, it's really interesting to me because I see it now through the eyes of like, it's like the shadow side, right? The more you repress something, the more it will find a way to come out. And the more repressed it is, often the more toxic or like harmful, it comes out in more harmful ways. And we see this in society in general, like the sexual shadow of society in general, because we still have so much programming and weird shit around sex. And that's why you and I do this work, to try and like spread the sex positive message.
Yeah.
But I think just within, it's like we can see that shadow in the world at large, but then within these fundamental religions, it's even more clear because it's repressed even more. And what I realized as I started coming out of this, as like I would call them high control religions, orthodox fundamentalism, that kind of thing, I realized that what I had been indoctrinated with from even before I was a teenager, like even before puberty, is what's widely known in the States as, at least, as purity culture. And yeah, Jehovah's Witnesses love to think that they're so different and the only special chosen ones. But now that I could look at all sort of the doctrines and the rules of all the religions, I realized that it's pretty much the purity culture aspect is exactly the same as you would find in conservative evangelical Christianity, the same you would find in Mormonism, Catholicism. Like, it's all the same, and it's creepily the same, down to the metaphors that are used. I don't know if you ever heard those things, like, you're like the rose, and then they would like pass the rose around the room and everyone would take a petal, and then that would be all the Oreo. Like, everyone licked and crushed the Oreo as it moved around the room, and then at the end the teacher would hold it up and say, who wants this Oreo, after everyone's had a lick, and everyone would be like, gross. And then that's supposed to be, a girl that's had sex with more than one person. And for me, I remember so clearly, I was under the age of 10, and I remember my mom, with all her good intentions, telling me, teaching me that if I had sex with a lot of people, it would be like I was a towel in like a public bathroom that everyone wiped their hands on. And then nobody would want to obviously touch me anymore. My worth would diminish because my sexuality was equated with my worth. And yeah, it's that kind of toxicity. It's the construct of virginity, as if you can somehow lose some aspect of yourself by having sex. It's all of that that really contributes to women, particularly because the focus is most often on them, through things like modesty culture as well, like be careful what you wear. It's always, the responsibility is always on the woman, right? Like, to control the man. And when the man acts out or sins or whatever, then it's always like, well, what did the woman do to cause that? And so the shame and the stifling of like women's sexuality and the fear around that can it goes beyond just mental, when it's that level of indoctrination from literally pre-puberty. You're taught to be terrified of your own body, your own sexuality, and this emphasis on being pure. And yeah, and also, like, you don't own your body, your father owns your body, and then it gets handed on to your husband. So all of that together really manifests in ways that go beyond just sort of mental, and can come through the body somatically as well. So yeah, I know I've gone on a whole tangent. I have so much to say about this, but yeah,
absolutely. No, it's so good. It's so good. But I really, well, just to take a pause to like reflect on some of that too. I love everything that you said about how, with the purity culture, and it really it does go more heavily on the woman, whether or not this is from, Eve eating the apple, and it's like women are the original sinners, and carrying all of that shame and how it really cuts women off from their worthiness, their power, their sexuality, their sensuality. And it's just really been a tool used by patriarchal systems from centuries ago now, ever since the fall of the goddess, and really not having a matriarch or worshiping women, where it's been used to control women in the sense of how can, and it's interesting because it's so ingrained and socially norm for so long that people are completely blind to it when they're really in the religion piece of it. And this isn't to like bash on religions or anything, but it's just in the facts and the reality of how these structures and systems and behaviors really affect human psyche and female psyche, and to where it's such a disservice to, I think, to humankind in general, to repress women and people in such a way that there is child abuse happening because of it. There is women being subservient and thinking they have to put up with different kinds of abuse because of it. And this shows up in religions and cultures all over the world. And I'm just really grateful that this day and age, as a Western, privileged white woman, that like to have these conversations so that in the generations to come, that women can start liberating themselves, very much in the way that you did, of really getting to crack open and out of toxic, really just of toxic religious ways of
Mhm.
being. I'm trying to lifestyle. I don't know how else to say it, but
Yeah. Toxic religion, patriarchal like system of control and oppression, like whatever you want to call it. Yeah, and I think I love your point about how this has been used to control women throughout the ages. And I think for me, that's one of the key points, and what's helped me to really make the switch is realizing, and this is a question I ask myself all the time now, and it's something I also ask my clients, which is, when I believe this or when I do this, who benefits? And looking at it through that lens, it becomes so clear that cutting women off from their sexuality, it doesn't just cut them off from sex and pleasure, but it cuts them off from their body, from their intuition. When you're constantly having to numb yourself to anything pretty much below the neck, you lose out on so much of who you are, and you do become so much easier to control. So looking at it from that perspective, it makes so much sense why they would choose sexuality as the thing to really double down on,
yeah.
because it's so powerful when you have it, and it's so powerful when you take it away. So yeah, that's like realizing that, and that really brings out my inner rebel and my sort of like, fuck you.
Me too.
Like,
I'm
I
over here
don't be
like snapping. I'm
controlled.
like, yes.
Yeah, I'm like,
Yes.
hell no, like I will not let you control me anymore. And when I can like link that to my sexuality, it kind of makes reclaiming your sexuality and your sensuality and just your body, it makes it such an act of reclamation, really,
Yeah.
and of really putting down your foot and just saying, this is my body, like it's my life. And that can be incredibly healing, which is why sexuality is the sort of the area or the tool I've gone with in terms of how I, from my perspective, try to help people who have left high control religion.
Yeah, absolutely. And this plays into, and even one step further too than just with women. Just in, and I shared a story with you prior to hopping on the call around how it really affects LGBTQ plus communities. And when I was growing up, and my pastor's, one of his daughters, was gay, and actually I think the other one, the son, was gay too. So there was, but they were banished from the church, from their families. Like they had to move out. They were not welcome home. It was like nobody spoke of them. And the how that affects somebody in their own sexuality, because it's still a very brave and courageous act, especially for the gay community and the LGBTQ community, to just feel like they can be safe in their sexuality. And when you have this kind of religious context put on it, it's so damaging. And I'm curious for you, how do you feel like it, in the context of all of this and in the sexuality piece,
Mhm.
how did that change your relationship to God or source? Did you have, I know for me, for a long time, I like refused to use the word God. It just like triggered me because I'd be like, anything but that, and God's not a man. And like I had like a lot of things to like really work out around that. And I'm curious, what was your experience like that, after growing up so religious, and having to come back, and getting to come back into your sexuality? How did your relationship to source or God or universe, or however you call, that now, shift and change, and what does that look like for you now?
Oh, I love that question. That's a delicious question. Yeah. Um, so I want to go back one step to what you just said about the gay community and the LGBTQ community and how they are so affected. by these kinds of religious systems. And I just actually wanted to say that I would, I absolutely agree with that. I didn't even see gay people growing up or anything like that. It was completely like in the shadows. Nobody would speak about it. And quite frankly, I never even saw it, at least as a young child and a teenager. It was just never even an option. And it's taken me until now, and literally until this year, to even fully claim that I am queer. Like, I claim that, and that I am bisexual, pansexual, I'm not quite sure. And
You're like all the things.
it's been all of the things. Like, why would I limit myself only to bisexual? Because I'm not. Like, I'm into everyone. So yeah, so I think even on my own journey with that, like realizing how I that's like the difference between suppressing something, right, where consciously but you don't allow it, and repressing. And I realized that I had repressed that part of me almost out of existence, but not completely. And it's even now, I mean, it's been 5 years since I've been out and free, and it's taken me 5 years to really overcome even the internalized homophobia that I carried, and I would probably say still carry to some extent. So yeah, I just wanted to also say that, like, growing up, I would have said, yes, I never saw gay people, but I didn't even know that I was like part of that as well.
Mm-hmm.
So anyways, that's an aside. And coming back to your question of my relationship to source or the universe, yeah, that was interesting. I went like a pendulum swing from, God, man, all of that, to complete atheism, and just rejection of anything beyond the material world and science. And I was like buying all these books in those first few months, like God is not great and the God delusion. And I was just going down that path. And I think that was vital for me in terms of my healing. Like, I had to go from one end of the spectrum to the other. And then in the years since that, I've definitely found myself back to like a more middle ground. And while I don't like to really label myself anymore, because I'm just like, I've been labeled so much, like I'm done with that. I would say that I definitely, I probably call it like the universe, or like universal intelligence. And yeah, I'm still unpacking for myself whether I see that as like an outside force, whether I see that as the power of my own subconscious and my own being to create pretty much anything I want. I really play around with those ideas every day, and I actually think they're pretty much the same thing. And yeah, I love working with things like, God is a woman. I did that yesterday with one of my clients, actually, like playing with that concept, and or like I am God or I am the goddess, and things like that, and just removing any fear or even like binary thinking from these concepts. We were taught to think in such a binary way, like, woman versus man, black versus white, God versus the devil, and good versus bad. And I'm just always trying to challenge that in myself as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that too, because I studied with Mama Gina, and she talks about, the great pussy in the sky, and she's like, I'm calling it goddess, not God, kind of a thing. And it really opened up so much for me too around, why are we putting human, he, she, binary kind of things on something we actually don't fucking understand as
At
humans
all.
at all, and probably much more so less now than more primal humans, right? Just because of the way culture and society has moved us. And so with that being said, I think it's such an avenue through what you're doing with women through sexuality and healing this trauma, for them to actually come back into learning how to actually connect into their own source. And that's something I really dove into with Mama Gina, where she also talks about how through religion, through the patriarch, through these systems that women were never taught to how to plug in to their own source, how to plug into their own power, how to plug into their own pleasure. And when we learn how to internally do that versus looking for the man or the marriage or the job or the thing outside of us, how big of a shift and transformation that truly is for women. And so in reflecting and seeing your journey with your healing journey with that, and now you getting to help other women with that, it's so needed and so important in women's work to really heal that relationship of our own to goddess or our GPS or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. I love that. It's vital. Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. And how is that in your own experience and with working with your clients when there has been removal from family or church? Because I know one of my mentors, Martha Beck, I'm not sure if you've heard of her, but she talks about she grew up in Utah in a very Mormon cultish, very
Yeah.
similar, where when she
Oh,
wrote, yeah, exactly. And she wrote a book, and when she came out about her experience, she got death threats. Her family shunned her. Same thing. Like she basically was like, I had nothing. Like no one would talk to me. I'm not sure what her relationship is like that now, but how is that for you and for your clients it's almost in that feeling of being orphaned. And I
Yeah.
so see that a lot in the hero's journey, right? Where you're like pushed out of the tribe or you're orphaned and then you start on your own, almost like a pilgrimage. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about how that is for you now, or like how you've healed around that or your clients have healed when there's been that sense of abandonment from your tribe and from the people that we all get a lot of support from religion and family and different things, and when you're ostracized from that, it can be really toxic and lethal for humans, just for a human psyche, I think,
Yeah.
for your human psyche in
Yeah.
general.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's what makes it such a powerful weapon that these kinds of organizations wield, because that is a fundamental human need to belong. And as you said, tracing it back, like if you were kicked out of your tribe back in the day, you've literally could not survive on your own in the wild. Like you were going to die. And we still carry that within us. So that kind of shunning, ostracizing, and that very, it's not just a feeling of not belonging, but it's actually not belonging. That can trigger such a massive trauma response where you feel that your life is in danger. And this is really the one of the key things that why religious trauma is even a thing and why it's a definition that is used nowadays. Because if we look at trauma as being not the thing that happens, but the way your body has a physiological reaction to something that's overwhelming, if you understand it from that lens, then definitely something like being ostracized from your family and your community, even though you might not be in physical danger, to your system is completely overwhelming and does read as basically a death threat. Like you said, it's like it can be lethal. And in some cases, it is lethal where people just simply can't come back from that and don't come back from that. And the range of even mental health problems and things like that that are caused by this harmful practice are, it's really disgusting. And it's something I'm personally get very fired up about because
Yeah.
it's just inhumane. And often people are this is done to them when they are already at their lowest. So like in my example, for instance, and so many other people, it's when you need that love and support most that this happens. So coming back to how I work with clients on that and so on, although it's not the key thing I work with clients on, it's very often present. And even thinking of my own journey, and I love how you brought the Euros journey into that as well, which I love. It's definitely there's often like a fork, a fork in the road where you have to decide, are you going to strike out on your own, continue on your own, or are you going to try to go back and assimilate back into your community? And I've just seen over and over and over again that if you can find the inner resilience and strength at that point to trust yourself and to pull together whatever resources, inner and external, that you have, it's so worth it to just stick it out. Like, trust yourself, trust that you will be able to figure it out. And the pain, it doesn't take away the pain of losing your family very often, but what you gain in terms of like self-determination and creating a life that actually makes you so fucking happy, and finding friends who see you for who you really are and accept you for that, relationships based on like actual authenticity, that I've never met someone who's regretted leaving, no matter what the cost was. Like, they wouldn't underestimate the pain of it, but I've never heard somebody say, I wish I hadn't. Yeah.
Yeah. And metaphorically, what I think of is when some, like being in the cocoon and busting out of it as a butterfly and then trying to go fit back into like the fucked
Yeah.
up little skin that
Yeah.
you were in before. and
Yeah.
and yeah, that can cause so much turmoil for people because it's like they want to, they want that connection and the closeness and the intimacy with what they had before, but it's just too many things have been changed and seen and
You
felt
can't
and
unsee what you see. Yeah.
yeah,
I always say
exactly.
that. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. Amazing. And so just for the women in this community who are curious, I would love for you to share anything that you have going on right now, whether it's one-to-one or group or program, and where people can find you and connect with you. And I'll also drop in the comments too, where people can connect with you as well.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So I am on Instagram. It's like Liane _ Elle _ coaching, but I know you'll put in the comments. And then I also have a Facebook group that's called Rise from Religious Trauma. And it's for women and non-binary people. And it's a more intimate space where we can talk about these things more openly, perhaps, than on my Instagram, where everybody can see. And yeah, at the moment, I'm actually, this week I'm running a live series called Dance with Your Demons.
Cool.
And it's like a light take on shadow work, and it's all about getting to know these pieces of us that we might have suppressed or repressed, emotions that we struggle to feel, anything that we've kind of pushed to the side. And it's just quite a playful take on that. And then on the weekend, I'll be hosting on Sunday a workshop around that topic, which people are welcome to come to. And yeah, then I am opening up 3 one-on-one spots to work with me until the end of the year. So that's what I've got going on.
Awesome. Well, make sure to put that in the comments below. And thank you so much for coming on today. It was such a pleasure to talk about this because it is such an important conversation that needs to be had for women all over the world.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for also making the space. I know religion it's one of the taboos, right? Like religion, sex, and politics. And I know we love to talk about all 3 of those.
Yes.
So thank you for making that space.
Of course.